Good evening. We're back with another DC Dual Force video, and this evening will be a tier list for the Ultimate Rarity cards. Ultimate Rarity would also be called Legendary if we were playing Hearthstone. They are the highest rarity cards in the game. Currently there are 25 of them. Today is July 14th, 2023. The crafting system has not been implemented in the game yet, but when it is, which Ultimate Rarity cards to craft will be among the most critical decisions that a player needs to make. In Hearthstone, the legendary cards that you had access to is one thing that would separate you from other players at high levels of play. My personal experience with card games, I have played Hearthstone, I have played Lord of the Rings LCG, a PvE game, as well as Marvel Champions. I have also played competitively Star Wars CCG, and I played a lot of poker in college. In Hearthstone, I have been ranked as high as 167 in North America. When I played online poker, I was ranked in the top 3% of players. And in Marvel Snap, well, we don't know because there are no numerical rankings, but I have been to the highest tier each month that I've played and regularly play against high MMR players. So I will offer the benefit of my experience to give my recommendations about which of these ultimate level cards are going to be worth crafting, which are going to be high priority to craft, and which are going to be cards that we can safely ignore and not feel like we're missing anything. So let's dive in and we'll take a look. We'll just go in alphabetical order. And first up is going to be Batman, coming from the Tactics faction. One thing to note that's very important, you are not forbidden to play Batman if you already have Batman as a hero. In a card game like Marvel Champions, you could not play a Batman ally if you were running a Batman hero. Of course, that's a Marvel card game. But you could not run the ally version of the hero. There is no such restriction in DC Dual Force. You can run Batman, you can run multiple versions of Batman, you can run multiple copies of Batman. There is no such thing as a unique card in DC Dual Force. So let's take a look at Batman. He requires a gold resource. He has the traits Ambush, Hunter, and Hidden. And after you play a gadget, draw a card. He has 6/6 stats. Well, if you're running Tactics and you're running the Batman hero, you're going to be generating a lot of gadget cards, and each one will draw you a card. Let's go over what the Ambush, Hunter, and Hidden traits do. The Ambush trait means that when Batman is attacking, he does his damage first, which means that he does not take damage if he KOs the enemy that he is attacking. So he could attack a 10 attack, 6 shield character, KO it, and he would take no damage in return. The Hunter trait means that he does not have to attack the front row first. He can attack the back row if he chooses. He can attack protected or hidden allies, protected or hidden recruits as he sees fit. And the Hidden trait means he himself cannot be attacked as long as he is hidden. Typically that will only last one turn, but it at least guarantees that you will be able to make use of his Ambush and or Hunter traits. We talked in our hero tier list about the importance of creating or drawing cards. DC Dual Force is a very control-oriented game as opposed to Hearthstone, which is a more rush-oriented game. And the reason for that is that in Hearthstone you can attack over the head of any minion on the board, any ally on the board, unless they have guard. DC Dual Force is the opposite. You cannot attack over the head of any minion. They all automatically have guard. Any recruit automatically has guard unless your character has the Hunter trait. So whereas Hearthstone is a more rush-oriented game, DC Dual Force will be a more control-oriented game, and I have yet to see a rush deck that I thought was very good, which means that Since you can only play 2 cards per round, which cost resources unless you're able to generate any other resources, and cards that generate more resources are rare. Typically you'll be playing only 2 resource costing cards per round. You'll be drawing 1 card per round. That means you will run out of cards unless you are able to create or draw more cards. So cards like Batman that draw you cards, and draw you cards relatively easily, because if you're playing the Batman hero, you're going to have gadgets in your hand nearly all the time when you get to the gold tier resources. You will likely be able to draw at least 2 cards when you play Batman. This is an extremely good card. When you put all those traits together and the card draw, Batman is definitely going in the S tier. He is very, very strong. In fact, I'm not going to bury the lead. This is the strongest ultimate rarity card in the game in my opinion, and this would be my recommendation for the first card to craft, and it will be my first craft when the crafting system becomes available if I haven't drawn it from a pack already. That's how strong this card is. He's very, very good. Next up is Batmobile from the Tactics faction. Batmobile costs a gold resource. It was recently nerfed a little bit. Give a friendly leader Hunter and Evade. If it was a Tactics leader, give them +2 attack this turn for each gadget you've played this game. Or was it nerfed or was it buffed? I'm not sure now. But anyway, let's look at the way it is now. Well, you don't get any permanent value on the board, but you give your leader the ability to attack the enemy leader with a big attack. That is probably the most common use that you're going to see for this card. In addition, you give them a little bit of defense with an evade so they can tank and attack. So this is a late game card that you play in a close game in order to get a KO on an enemy leader. That would be the ideal usage for it. You could use it to take out a big minion. You're not likely to want to though, because this card gives your leader +2 for each gadget you've played this game, which means the longer the game has gone on and the more gadgets you've played, the more powerful the card is. But the longer the game has gone on, the less likely you are to be able to face tank a large amount of damage. So yes, you may be able to buff your leader up to 10 or 12 or whatever attack, but you're not going to want to take on 10 or 12 damage taking down like a big recruit such as Highfather or something like that, because you're not likely to have that level of HP available to you. The most likely use for this is one big attack by your leader against an enemy leader in the back row that you may not have been able to reach otherwise, and a surprise KO on that leader, which hopefully will give you an advantage. Well, the criteria that we're ranking these cards on: we want to know their overall power, we want to know how difficult they are to set up, how easy is it for us to get their best case scenario going. With the Batman recruit, it's not that difficult. You can get a very, very good value out of Batman with just a couple of gadgets, and any Batman player knows by the late game you've usually got a couple of gadgets sitting in your hand that you just haven't found a use for yet. Typically like a healing card or a recruit damage card or something like that that you just haven't found a good situation for. Not hard to get card draw out of Batman. So how difficult is it to set up the best case scenario for Batmobile? Well, you're going to be playing gadgets throughout the game, so it's not that difficult. Now, are you always going to need a big attack on an enemy hero in the back row? Are you always going to be able to KO an enemy hero in the back row? No, not always. Sometimes you may get into a situation where the damage that you can do with Batmobile just isn't going to make that big of an impact on the game at that moment. And if that's the case, are you going to want to play this card for a gold resource, or are you going to want to wait until you actually can KO an enemy hero, if that time ever comes along? If you're behind on the board, this card isn't going to help you a lot. If you're even, it's possible this could be a big play. If you're ahead, you don't really need it, but it could help you finish off the game faster. This is going in the B tier for me. It's going in the B tier because it's not always going to make a big impact on the game. And you can easily get into a situation where you've got a Batmobile attack, but you don't have enough damage to KO an enemy leader, and you actually don't have the HP on your heroes to take out a big recruit, and therefore this just sits in the hand. And it's not that you're sad to see this come out of a pack necessarily, but in terms of the priority that you're going to assign this when you're deciding which cards to craft, if you compared Batmobile to like Batman and decided to craft Batmobile first, I would not recommend that. I think Batman is stronger, much stronger, high priority craft. Batmobile is a B tier card. There's going to be a lot of cards that we're going to recommend crafting before Batmobile, just because it isn't always going to be useful, particularly if you're behind on the board. It's not going to turn things around. But when it is good, it's going to be very good and allow you a surprise KO on an enemy leader, and that can make a big impact on the game. Next up is Bizarro from the Anarchy faction. Very interesting card. He's a gold resource. He comes with Shield. Shield does exactly what you might imagine it would do. It tanks 1 attack for any amount. Same as it is in Hearthstone. Deploy, if Bizarro is in your back row, swap each player's back row with their front row, 9 attack and 5 shields. So he brings the heroes up to the front row, thereby making them very vulnerable. Well, if he did that for only the enemy's heroes, this would be a very strong card, but he does it for both heroes. Is that going to be good for us or bad for us? Well, as you might expect from a card like Bizarro, my opinion is that this is a more thematic or fun-oriented card. There may be decks in the future that are oriented around Bizarro. It's hard to orient your deck around one ultimate rarity card though, because it's just 1 in 40 and there isn't a lot of card draw in DC Dual Force. So for example, when I had Superman in my deck in the beta test, I played 4 games and only saw Superman in one of them. So this isn't going to be a card that you'll build a deck around. If any of these ultimate tier cards require you to build a deck around them in order to be good, that card isn't going to be very good. What we want from our ultimate rarity cards is we want them to make a big impact on the game when we see them, but we don't want to have to build the deck around them in order for that impact to happen, because we just aren't going to see them very often because it's a large deck and there isn't a lot of card draw. So is Bizarro good in a vacuum if you don't build a deck around him? I mean, sometimes he could be. If your opponent's hero, if your heroes have a lot more HP than your opponent's, but I mean, in that situation, you're probably winning already and you don't even need Bizarro. I don't think Bizarro is good. I don't think it's worth crafting at all. Bizarro for me is going in the D tier. He will be a low priority craft. I would only recommend him for fun or thematic reasons. Next up we have Catwoman, coming from the Tactics faction. Catwoman costs a silver resource. She is an Arkham inmate. She has the Hunter and Hidden traits. After Catwoman attacks a leader, draw a random gold card from your opponent's deck. She has 4/3 stats. Well, I've said before that any kind of card draw or the ability to create cards is very strong. And Catwoman's best case scenario, how often is it going to happen? Well, the hidden trait virtually and the hunter trait virtually guarantee that her best case scenario will happen, which is that you play her and then you get at least 1 attack on an enemy leader. You will likely only get 1 attack. Unless you're able to protect her in the back row, you'll likely only get 1 attack. But for a silver resource, 4 attack, 3 shields, and drawing a gold card from your opponent's deck is very strong. That's very, very strong. Now, she is an Arkham inmate, but that doesn't really impact anything from the tactics sphere. It can, though, if you're running tactics and anarchy together, because anarchy has some ways to buff Arkham inmates, so that can be an additional benefit for Catwoman. and is definitely worth noting as a positive for her. Catwoman is going in the S tier. This is another card that I'll look long and hard at and think about crafting after I craft Batman. She's very, very good. There's not a lot of high impact cards, high impact ultimate cards that come before the gold trait, before the gold resource becomes available. So Catwoman can have an impact and set you up for having a gold play the first time you get a gold resource. A lot of the time in DC Dual Force, you're using your resources inefficiently. You have gold and silver, but you don't have a gold card in your hand because you don't want to make a deck with too many gold cards, because then they clog up your hand early in the game and you get behind and then you lose. So Catwoman allows you to even out your curve. She creates value, steals a gold card from your opponent's deck. This is a very, very strong card. I like her a lot. And she's going in the S tier. Though I would craft a high value gold card before I craft her. And I think she's a good, like a second ultimate card, but not the one that I would craft first. Next up is going to be Clark Kent. Clark Kent costs a bronze resource, and he has start, transform Clark Kent into Superman, and exhaust him. Well, start means it happens at the start of your turn. So basically, if he survives through your opponent's turn, then you get to transform him into Superman, but not the ultimate version of Superman. The version of Superman that we get from Clark Kent is this version. He turns into a 6/6 with shield. Very, very strong if you get it off. And that's a big caveat, if you get it off. So let's say we play Clark Kent. We draw him in the opening hand. We go first. We play him. A reasonable amount of the time he will turn into Superman. It depends heavily on your opponent's deck. If he doesn't have any direct damage for turn 1, you can easily get Clark Kent into Superman. If you draw him and you're able to protect him in your back line so that he can turn into Superman, this is a strong play. But there will be times when that's just not the case because you're a little bit behind on the board. Both players are clearing their board every round, and the bronze resource that you spend on Clark Kent will simply go to waste as your opponent deals with it very easily. That will happen quite a lot. And so it's feast or famine with Clark Kent. He's not a high investment in terms of the resource cost, and he pays off well when he works, but a lot of the time he won't work. He's going in the lower B tier for me. This is a card that I would not put a high priority on crafting. It's a feast or famine card. We're going to go with cards like Batwoman, Batman, Batman, Catwoman first, and take a look at cards like Batmobile or Clark Kent later. But because of the feast or famine nature of the card, I mean, there will be times when you play him on turn 1. He turns into Superman and then you just win the game. But those will be fewer and far between, and I think Batman or Catwoman will win you games much more often and more consistently. So they get to be high priority crafts. You could put Clark Kent. Who would win the game more often, Clark Kent or Batmobile? They're probably roughly equal in terms of the amount of times they'll win the game for you. They're roughly equal, I think. Next up, we got Darkseid coming from the Tyranny faction. Darkseid costs a gold resource. Deploy, you may pay a silver resource to KO an enemy recruit, then destroy their space. He has 7 attack and 9 shields. This is a very, very strong card. You can pay a silver resource to KO an enemy recruit. It can be an enemy recruit, any stats, and then destroy their space so the opponent can't play anything in that space afterwards. You could use that to open up the right or the left lane so the opponent can't play anything to block for their hero. This is extremely good. He's going in the S tier right after Batman. I would craft him before I would craft Catwoman. I would craft Batman first, but Darkseid really, really good. Now, one thing to note, I don't think Tyranny is that good. But Darkseid might be worth playing Tyranny for all on his own. Those stats are great. He has better stats than all, but I think he has better stats than anybody else in the Ultimate list. Except for Highfather, who costs 2 resources to play, and in addition you get to the option of paying a silver resource to KO an enemy recruit and destroying their space. This is extremely good. High priority craft. Very, very good card. Next up is Deathstroke, coming from the Anarchy sphere. Anarchy faction. Costs a gold resource. He has the lethal trait. That means anything that he damages, he kills. After an enemy character is KO'd on your turn, ready Deathstroke. Well, so his best case scenario is KOing an enemy character, or you play him, you KO an enemy character, then you ready him, then you use him to KO something, or you KO something else, or multiple attacks with Deathstroke in one turn, or playing him on the turn. Being able to attack with him on the turn that he has played is his best case scenario. Not easy to set up, in my opinion. Not easy to set up at all. And in the best case scenario, how good is he? Best case, you could clear a couple of small things off the board. Not a high priority craft. He's going in the C tier. His best case isn't that good, and his best case isn't easy to set up. His stats are just too weak. Moving on to Detective Chimp. Detective Chimp costs a bronze resource. He has the evade trait, which means that the opponent needs to attack him once before he can be killed. Deploy. Identify the card in your opponent's deck from 3 suspects. If you solve the case, draw a card. What that means is when you play Detective Chimp, you'll be presented with 3 cards. 2 of them are nothing, and 1 of them is a card in your opponent's deck, and it's your job to guess which one is the card in your opponent's deck. And if you do guess correctly, then you get to draw a card from your deck, and Detective Chimp also has 2 attack and 3 stats. Drawing a card is great. In my experience, it's not that difficult to guess which the correct card is from your opponent's cards. His stats are weak. If all he did was cost a bronze resource, give us 2-3 stats, and draw a card, if we didn't even need to do the solve the case thing, if he just straight up drew a card and had evade, would he be good? Yeah, he's good. Not a high priority craft good. He's like a nice solid card that you'll include in pretty much every tactics deck that you play. He helps. He's nothing phenomenal. He's going in the high B tier in terms of his crafting priority. I'd craft him before I'd craft Batmobile or Clark Kent, probably. It's debatable though. It's like, would you rather have a Feast or Famine card, or would you rather have a card that always provides value but nothing phenomenal? That'll come down to your personal preference, and if you said you'd rather have the Feast or Famine of Batmobile or Clark Kent over Detective Chimp, I wouldn't blame you at all. But don't expect anything phenomenal from this card, but it's always going to do what it does, and what it does is provide decent value. And in the late game, drawing an extra card from your deck can be a big deal. So I like Detective Chimp. I would craft him before Batmobile or Clark Kent. Take the reliability over the Feast or Famine, but leave that to your personal preference. In any case, I would not recommend him as a high priority craft. Next up we have Firestorm, my favorite characters from the Legends of Tomorrow. He comes to us from the Energy faction. He costs a silver resource. He has the trait End, which means that it happens at the end of your turn. Deal 2 damage to each enemy in Firestorm's lane for each other card you've played this turn. He has 4 attack and 3 shields. Well, his best case scenario is multiple turns of damage in his lane. How likely is that to happen? Well, you need to be able to defend him in the back line, most likely. You're guaranteed to get the end of turn effect in the turn that he enters play. Likely he'll just do 2 damage, but it's possible he could do 4 or 6, depending on the deck that you're running. If you get 4 or 6 damage on the turn that you played, well, that's pretty high value, but not incredibly easy to set up. If you could get multiple turns, that's great, but you probably won't be able to get multiple turns of damage unless you're already winning, which would make him a win more card. So he's going in the C tier for me. Above Deathstroke, but he falls into the category of not super easy to get high value out of, and his stats are pretty low. So he'll be easy to kill, hard to protect unless you're already winning the game, in which case you don't need him. Not a high priority craft. Cards that are difficult to set up and get their best case scenario going, and in their worst case scenario don't provide a lot, like Firestorm or Deathstroke. They're not going to be very high priority crafts. Next up we have Green Arrow. Green Arrow comes to us from the Tactics faction. Costs a silver resource and has the ambush trait. That means he gets to deal his damage first. If he KOs the opponent, then he takes no damage in return, which is very helpful because he only has 2 shields and 5 health. Deploy, deal 2 damage to an enemy recruit. If they're KO'd, repeat this. So the ideal case for him would be deploying him, dealing 2 damage to an enemy recruit, KO, do it again, KO, do it again. How likely is that going to be to happen? If you drew him on curve, which means you drew him the very second you could make use of a silver resource, it's reasonably likely you could KO something and get another attack. You probably wouldn't get more than 1. If you draw him in the late game, you're probably not getting much value out of this. And the ambush trait requires that he survives for a turn, and that's really not likely. This card is not very good in my opinion. If it had more shields, we'd be taking a harder look at it. He's going in the C tier, and I'd put him roughly equivalent to Deathstroke or Firestorm in terms of the crafting priority. It's not likely that you ever get to make use of that ambush trait. What's most likely is that he deals 2 damage to an enemy recruit, maybe another 2 to another one, and then he dies. And probably dies in a trade that the opponent's not too sad about because it's something that just deals 2 damage or 3 damage that kills him, or even 1 damage and then a Batman gadget or something like that. So not a very high priority craft. Next up we have Hal Jordan coming from the Energy faction. Hal Jordan costs a gold resource, and he has the trait Green Lantern. And his ability, deploy, you may pay a bronze resource to double the attack and shields of Hal Jordan and a random Green Lantern in your hand. So you would double him up to a 10-10 and double the attack and strength of a Green Lantern in your hand for the cost of a bronze resource and a gold resource. Very, very strong. I like this card a lot. Very, very strong. It doesn't create value, but he's going in the high A tier, and debatably he's a carry. You may want to craft him before Catwoman. Now that I think about it, I think Catwoman's probably going in the A tier, and we'll put Hal Jordan in the S tier. These are the cards that we want to craft first. I think Catwoman is very good, but she's a secondary craft. She's a card that we craft after we've already got a carry or 2 in our deck. She's a card that you craft after Batman for sure. And Hal Jordan would be the top priority craft from the energy sphere for sure. He's very, very strong. Provides a lot. You get a 10-10 on the board, that turns the tide of a game. And then an additional doubling of Green Lantern in your hand, which isn't that hard of a condition to fulfill. Very, very strong card. I like him a lot. Catwoman I like a lot too. But to say that we should craft Catwoman before Hal Jordan, I mean, it's debatable. That's how good I think Catwoman is. It's debatable. She's really, really good. Creating the value of stealing a gold card from your opponent versus a 10/10 plus additional stats. But she does it from the silver spear, or the silver resource. It's close, but I think we're just going to have one card from each faction in the S tier, the top priority crafts. And so Catwoman's going in the A tier. Next up we have Heart of Darkness, a very interesting card. It comes to us from the Anarchy faction. Costs a silver resource. Transform a damaged friendly recruit into Eclipso with 3 charges. Well, we'll have to take a look at Eclipso to evaluate this. This is Eclipso. So Eclipso comes with 3 charges, thanks to Heart of Darkness. And Eclipso has attack of 3 and 10 shields, and an enemy recruit has the power. An enemy recruit deals damage equal to its attack to another random enemy character, and you can use that power right away. Really, really, really strong card, Heart of Darkness. I like it a lot. It's not super easy to set up. There's going to be times when you struggle to set it up, because you have to fulfill the criteria of damaging a friendly recruit without it dying, and both players will be trying their best to clear the board every turn, and oftentimes succeeding. The lifespan of your average recruit's not very long. Getting damage on one isn't super easy unless you're already in control of the game, in which case you might not need Eclipso. So, not easy to set up, but when you do set it up, you'll be very happy with the value that you get from it. It's going in the B tier, the Feast or Famine tier. It's going above Batmobile or Clark Kent, and I'd be open to it moving up into the A tier, depending on what other cards are available to help set up the combo. If there's an easy way to damage a recruit, a friendly recruit, on the same turn that we play it and then play Heart of Darkness, well, that would change the equation. That won't be an easy combo to set up though, even if it exists. So I think a lot of times Heart of Darkness will simply sit in the hand for a few turns and we won't be able to do anything with it. And if we're in top decking mode and we get Heart of Darkness, when we were looking for something like, I don't know, Hal Jordan or Darkseid or something, you'd always be happier to see those cards. So it's not going to be the highest priority craft, but it is very strong in its best case scenario. Transform a damaged friendly recruit into Eclipso. Very, very strong in its best case scenario. Not super easy to get off in a lot of cases. Next up we've got Helmet of Fate. Coming from the Energy faction. It costs a bronze resource. Create a copy of this in your deck, draw a card, and give a friendly recruit +1/+1 for each magical spell you've played this game. So in order to get high value out of this, you have to have played a lot of magical spells, and you've got to have a friendly recruit on the board you can use this on. That isn't really a bronze resource type of card. I suppose it's costs bronze because it's in energy, so you can use it after you use Hal Jordan's hero power to generate another bronze resource or something like that. This is really not easy to set up at all. Really not easy. This is going pretty far down the crafting list. I guess we put it ahead of Bizarro, but I don't think this is very good. It's going to be really hard to set up. It's clunky, and its best case isn't going to be that good. So not a big fan. Next up we got Highfather from the Might Sphere, a gold resource card. Comes with Aura, which means he can eat an enemy spell and not have any effect. It's like Shield, but for spells only. As an additional cost to play Highfather, pay silver resource, so he costs both of your resources for the round, but he comes to you with 12/12 and he's not easy to get rid of. This is a very strong card, very strong carry type card. He's going in the A tier. I don't think he's the best might ultimate card, but he is very good. So as the second best might ultimate, he goes in the A tier. Not a card to be sad to draw from a pack at all. Very, very good card. Gets played, I think, nearly any time that you draw him. Hard for the opponent to deal with. Definitely capable of winning a game for you. Very, very strong. This is the highest statted card in the game, I believe. At least the highest statted ultimate card, for sure. Very strong. Next up we have Massacre. Massacre comes from the Tyranny faction. Costs a gold resource. KO all recruits. That means yours, the enemies, everybody. So why would you want to do that? Well, obviously you'd want to KO all recruits in a situation where you're pretty far behind on the board, because that'll equalize things. I have never in card games liked cards that were only good when you're losing. Because when we're building our decks, our plan is always to be winning. And I don't like to play cards that are only good when your plan has failed. Because when you're in a game where the board is even, it's not going to be useful. When you're in a game where you're ahead, it's really not going to be useful. Only useful when you're behind. And if you're behind and then you KO all recruits, you're probably behind because A, either you got unlucky so far, and you use Massacre and you equalize, and then maybe your luck changes and you're able to turn the game around. Or you were behind because the opponent's deck or their play was simply better than yours. In which case Massacre doesn't help you. Because yes, you've cleared the board, but you're still in the same situation as you were before, which is that your opponent's deck and or his play is better than yours, and so you're just going to get behind on the board again. The situation where this card is good is a situation in which you've gotten unlucky to this point, you equalize things, reset, hopefully find some better luck, and you go from there. That just isn't going to happen that often. This is a very low priority craft, even less than Brainiac. Not a fan of it. There may be a situation or a deck where this makes sense, but as of right now, I wouldn't recommend crafting this card. Next up we have Mera, coming from the Might faction. She costs a silver resource. First time you deploy a recruit with 5 attack or more each turn, summon a Tidal Wave. She's got 3 attacks, 7 health. Let's take a look at the Tidal Wave card. This is Tidal Wave, which means it has speed, which means it can attack right away. It has attack of 5 and 1 shield, and it has end, sacrifice Tidal Wave, which means it dies at the end of your round. It's essentially a 5-cost spell. So Mera summons one of these each time you play the first time you deploy a recruit with 5 or more attack each turn. If you can play her simultaneously with a 5 attack recruit, that's decent value. That's not easy to set up though, because a lot of your deck is going to be bronze or silver resources to make sure you can get off to a good start. You may not have that many 5 attack recruits in your deck, and her stats aren't that good at 3/7. She's going in the C tier. I think her best case scenario is actually pretty hard to set up. It's not that easy to keep her alive. She doesn't really punish the opponent for trading into her. Is she better a higher priority than Green Arrow, Deathstroke, Firestorm? Debatable, but You'll note that all of those cards in the C tier have weaker stats. And the cards in the A tier all come with extremely high stats, or in Catwoman's case, the ability to steal a high statted card from your opponent. And the cards in the B tier, Detective Chimp, very consistent, but the others are Feast or Famine. And the cards in C tier are all kind of weaker statted cards with abilities that are inconsistent or don't quite make up for their weak stats. So that's where I think Mera belongs. And the cards in D tier are just clunky, hard to use, or fun thematic cards. Next up we have Nekron. Nekron comes to us from the Tyranny faction. He costs a gold resource. He has the ability to start, summon a friendly recruit that was KO'd this game. And he has 3 attack and 10 health. That 10 health makes it reasonably likely that he's going to get that ability off. That'll happen a lot, and when it does, he'll create a lot of value, and if it happens twice, you're probably just going to straight up win. I think Nekron is very good. Very, very strong. He's going in the A tier because the S tier is going to be for the best card in each faction, and that's Darkseid for the Tyranny faction. But he is very, very good, and after Darkseid, he would be the second card, the second ultimate that I would craft if I were playing Tyranny, for sure. Very, very good. I like him a lot. That value is going to be such a high priority kill for your opponent. Now, if you're behind on the board, you may not get that ability off, but at least he absorbs 10 attack, even in the worst case scenario, dealing 3 damage each time. Virtually guaranteed to tank multiple attacks unless your opponent's got like a hurl into the stratosphere or something like that. Very good, very strong card. Next up we have Poison Ivy coming from the Tyranny faction. She costs a gold resource. She is an Arkham inmate. Has the lethal trait. After Poison Ivy damages a leader she's attacking, KO them. 1 attack and 7 health. Well, at first glance, that seems extremely good. It seems like you could do, I don't know, 20 attack or something with Poison Ivy. What we really need with her is a way to give her the Hunter trait, because it's not so easy to get damage on an enemy leader. If you're at the point where you're getting damage on enemy leaders with allies, you're probably winning the game already, and you don't really need Poison Ivy. If you're in an even board situation, you're really going to be struggling to get damage on enemy leaders. You can still use her lethal and maybe take out 1 or 2 enemy minions, and that's pretty strong. That's pretty strong. Not likely that you get her ability off and KO an enemy leader. I would guess maybe, I don't know. It's only going to be 1 in 4 games or so that you actually see her, and of those, I don't know, 1 in 4 or 5 times maybe you KO an enemy leader. Her lethal with the 7 HP is not bad though. She's going in the high B tier. I think she is consistently pretty good. Debatably better than Detective Chimp. Inconsistently, she wins the game for you. This is like a hallmark of the B tier. Detective Chimp is just a solid, always gives decent value, but the rest of these cards are sometimes winning the game. Poison Ivy does more than the others, though, in the times that she doesn't win the game because of that lethal trait. So I like her. She's good. She's no Nekron, she's no Darkseid, but she's good. And I'm putting her in the B tier. Next up we have Shazam coming from the Energy faction. Shazam costs a gold resource. He has speed, which means he can attack right away when he enters, similar to Charge in Hearthstone. If Shazam would be KO'd, he transforms into Billy Batson instead. Let's take a look at Billy Batson. Billy Batson says, start, transform Billy Batson into Shazam. So the opponent needs to be able to KO Shazam and then deal with Billy Batson, which they probably will be able to do. or they're probably not going to KO Shazam on a turn when they can't deal with Billy Batson. He looks very grumpy in that picture. So it's not likely that you ever see Shazam KO'd and then transformed back into Billy Batson unless Shazam was KO'd by like incidental damage from a spell or something like that. And then maybe the opponent doesn't have a way to deal with him and he transforms back, but it's not going to happen very often. Most of the time you're just going to get Shazam. And what you get for Shazam is pretty good. You get an attack for 7. Probably that KOs something, and then probably the opponent then trades into him and KOs him and then has to deal with Billy Batson as well. That's not easy to deal with for an opponent, and he does provide solid value. He's not as good as Hal Jordan, but he's going in the A tier as a very strong card and the second best card in the Energy faction, second best ultimate card. And I would put him, well, any of these cards could be high priority, depending on which faction you like the best, after you've crafted the best card in that faction. Shazam, very strong, provides high value. Not quite as high as Hal Jordan, though. Next up, we have Superman. Costs a gold resource, comes with shield. Comes with 8/8 stats, and while Superman is in your front row, your leaders are invincible. That means that a leader that you're playing that you're not able to attack with anymore because their HP is too low, well, now you play Superman and now you can attack with them and not take any damage. Superman's really, really good. He's going in the S tier. He is the best ultimate rarity might card, in my opinion. A high priority craft for the might sphere. And the might faction is pretty good. Its heroes are pretty strong. Wonder Woman's good. Superman's pretty good. So he's going higher than Darkseid or Hal Jordan simply because I think tactics and might are better than tyranny or energy. And I think energy is better than tyranny. So Hal's going above Darkseid, not necessarily because Hal is better than Darkseid. I think Darkseid in a vacuum is second best behind Batman. If Darkseid was in another faction, he would go number 2 on this list, but because Tyranny is kind of far down there in terms of the quality of its heroes, it's not going to be the highest priority craft. We're going to have Batman first, then Superman, then Hal Jordan, of the cards that we've looked at so far. Next up is going to be the Joker, coming from the Anarchy faction. After a friendly inmate, Arkham inmate, is KO'd, deal 4 damage to a random enemy character. Joker costs a gold resource and comes with 6/4 stats. Not super hard for an enemy opponent to deal with, so you probably have to protect him in a back row in order to get high value out of the Joker. If you've got Arkham inmates on board already that you can then KO and get a couple of procs of Joker's ability out, that's great. But if you ask the question in a very close game where only 1 or 2 slots are being taken up and we're top decking, would I rather draw the Joker or would I rather draw Superman? I mean, in that situation, you're just going to start laughing, right? The Joker takes setup in order to get full advantage of him. If you don't have any Arkham inmates ready to be KO'd, he's really not that good. He's really not that good at all in that scenario. And because of that, he's going in the high C tier. He's got higher stats than these other kind of lower statted characters, or we'll say kind of easy to deal with, hard to set up characters. But that is the category that he falls into. Not easy to get his best case scenario off. And you'd nearly always rather see something else. At least in a really close game. And if you're deciding what to craft, I wouldn't put a high priority on the Joker. Too difficult to set up. And we would rather have I'd rather have a higher statted character, to be honest, than 4 damage randomly. The randomly is a big downside as well. It's thematic, and it like kind of synergizes with the Joker hero power, but not that strong. Next up we have the Riddler, a bronze cost card coming from the Tyranny Sphere. At the start of your opponent's turn, they seek a card and put it in your hand. He has 2 attack and 4 shields. If you play him on turn 1, there is a reasonable likelihood this could happen twice. The opponent is always going to choose the lowest value card that they can for you. That's true. It's usually not something terrible. You'll usually be able to find some use for it. He consistently provides decent value. I'm going to rank him in the B tier right behind Detective Chimp. I think they're very similar, though I would take Detective Chimp first because you have more control over what you get from Detective Chimp, though Riddler, with his slightly stronger stats, it's reasonably likely that you'll get 2 cards from him. May not be very high quality cards if your opponent's choosing garbage for you, which they always will, but you do at least get 2 cards for him, and I like that. I tried him out a little bit. I found him better than I thought he would be. Not going to be a high priority craft, but he's decent. Not a card I'd be sad about pulling from a pack, but I'd craft the S and A tier cards first. Next up we have the Speed Force, coming from the Energy faction. The Speed Force, ready each recruit that attacked this turn. Well, if you're in a situation where this is good, you're already winning and you don't need this. It's very hard to set up a high value Speed Force turn, so it's a low priority craft. I'd put it even lower than Helmet of Fate. And if someone were to make the argument you should craft this before the other energy cards like Shazam or Hal Jordan, no. I would not recommend that at all. I don't think the Speed Force is good because it's too hard to set up. And in a close game where you just got 1 or 2 slots on the board filled, I mean, what are you going to do with multiple attacks per turn anyway? Usually you use recruits to trade into other recruits. If you're in a situation where your recruits are attacking and winning, you're already winning the game. You don't need the Speed Force. So, not a good card, in my opinion. And unfortunately, one of the ultimates that I pulled from a pack first with my opening packs. Next up we have Two-Face, coming from the Anarchy Sphere. Two-Face is a bronze cost card with the deploy ability. Choose an enemy recruit, flip a coin to decide, KO them, or draw a card. Either option is very good. This is, in my opinion, the best Anarchy ultimate, but it also isn't strong enough that I'm willing to put it in the A tier. I think Anarchy is in a rough place. I can't really justify putting this any higher than high B tier. I think it's better than Detective Chimp. It's high roll. KOing a recruit can be very useful late game and moderately useful early game. It could be something like deal 2 or 3 damage early game or draw a card, which is fair. It's fair. It's on average higher value than Detective Chimp, but it's nothing exceptional. And it's not going to be a card that I'd be really excited to craft. Anarchy's in a rough place in terms of its ultimates. I don't think it has an S tier card, or even an A tier one. Though Heart of Darkness, certainly hilarious when it works, and a lot of fun. But will be kind of difficult to set up. I guess Heart of Darkness is the best card in the Anarchy tier, and you could make a case that it should go in like the A tier. I don't think it's an S tier card, but Heart of Darkness probably is the best B tier card, but it's just so hard to set up in a close game. It's going to sit in the hand for a while, and so in any situation where you desperately need high value out of a card that you draw this round, Heart of Darkness may not be it. Probably won't be, and then when you eventually do get it off, it'll provide high value, but On average, I think Two-Face provides more. On average. Even so, the Anarchy Ultimates, I don't think Anarchy is in a good place at all. With its heroes, with its cards. Not a faction that I would recommend focusing on for competitive play. And last, we have Unexpected Help, a Might card with a gold resource cost. If you have fewer than 2 leaders, summon a Might, Energy, or Tactics leader. They have 10 shields and 3 charges. Well, in the situation where you really need this, that's very good. But what is that situation going to be? So you've lost one of your leaders. Again, similar to Massacre, you've lost a leader because either you got unlucky, or your deck or your play is simply not as good as your opponent's. And if that's the case, getting another leader back with 10 shields and 3 charges will help you extend the game. You'll still lose though. If you've simply gotten unlucky up to that point, Unexpected Help absolutely could turn the tide of the game and turn a loss into a win. In a very evenly matched game, where each of you have lost a hero, Unexpected Help could turn a evenly matched game into a win. But if you were in that situation, wouldn't you rather have Superman? Or wouldn't you rather have Highfather? I mean, wouldn't they do that just as effectively? And they would be effective in other situations as well, such as when you still have 2 leaders, which is going to be most of the time. So it's going to be a low priority craft, Unexpected Help. I would put it low C, high D tier in terms of the priority you would put on it. Probably high D tier. So that's our tier list, which means that my top 4 recommended ultimate cards to craft are Batman, Superman, Hal Jordan, and Darkseid. After that, Catwoman, Highfather, Nekron, and Shazam. After that, Two-Face, Detective Chimp, the Riddler, Poison Ivy, and at that point I would say you can start debating about what you actually are trying to do. You could go ahead and get Batmobile, Clark Kent. I'm going to put Heart of Darkness lower than them just because the Tyranny faction is in such a rough place now that we see all the cards. So I'd probably, after Detective Chimp, Riddler, Poison Ivy, I'd probably get into like Batmobile or Clark Kent before I'd get into Heart of Darkness. Heart of Darkness probably is better than those cards, or at least equivalent to them, but Anarchy is just in a rough place, and I don't recommend getting into the Anarchy faction really at all. I would get Tactics and Might first. After that, you could debate whether you want to focus on Energy or Tyranny. Darkseid's really strong and Nekron's really strong, but the Energy heroes are probably better than Tyranny. Tyranny heroes, Poison Ivy, Lex Luthor, Black Adam just really aren't that good, so I'd focus on Energy first. That's my recommendation. Tactics, Might, Energy, and then potentially Tyranny. And I'd craft the cards in this order: Batman, Superman, Hal Jordan, Catwoman, Highfather, Nekron, or Shazam. And then after that, maybe take a look at Detective Chimp or Clark Kent, maybe Batmobile, or maybe start thinking about Tyranny with Darkseid, Nekron, and try that out. So with the open beta starting today, these recommendations will change over time because typically in betas there are a lot of balance patches which will change the equation in terms of the strengths or weaknesses of these cards. As things stand as of today, July 14th, 2023, these are my recommendations for which cards to craft first once the crafting feature becomes available. So, thank you for watching.